On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, are U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports heading toward a strike? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So you may remember many episodes with Sal talking about the looming potential of a strike on the west coast of the United States during the global supply chain crisis. The PMA, the Pacific Maritime Association, that represented all the carriers and terminals on the West Coast, and the ILW, the International Longshore Warehouse Union on the West Coast, were in the midst of a contract renegotiation. Matter of fact, the contract expired. They were working without a contract, and there was a looming threat of a strike on the West Coast. Until that magic day in June of 2023, when white smoke appeared above the meeting hall in San Francisco, and we had an agreement between those two. I'm kidding, there was no white smoke. It would have been awesome if they did that. I mean, it was kind of important, almost like a papal selection, but they had an agreement, and it alleviated a lot of tension and concern on the West Coast. Well, just when you thought the issue had gone away, it's back, but this time it's on the East and Gulf Coast, with the end of a labor negotiation, or excuse me, end of a labor agreement scheduled for September 30th of 2024. No, that's not a big problem with a presidential election looming on the horizon. That's right. In the United States, we have a looming presidential election between two young and virile young men who are just fresh-faced and new to politics. It's going to be an exciting presidential election here in the United States. I'm kidding. We have two very old white men who are running for president, who have run for president already in the past. It's going to be terrible. I don't care which way you go on this one. It's not going to be good. But looming in the background is this potential of a labor strike. We're going to take a look at that. The ILA, the International Longshore Association, and the United States Maritime Alliance. What's going on between those two? If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Here's the story from Mike Schuller over in G-Captain. The ILA, International Longshoremen Association, has suspended negotiations with the US Maritime Alliance over a new labor contract for dock workers at US East Coast, Gulf Coast ports, fueling concerns over a potential strike that could exacerbate the already strained supply chains. This story over in Container News goes a little bit deeper, where they talk about the fact that the ILA said it was opting to cancel talks with the USMX after learning that APM terminals and Maersk Line are reportedly using an autogate system at the port of Mobile in Alabama and other U.S. ports. The system autonomously processes trucks without ILA labor, the union said. The ILA then argues that the use of this technology violates the current agreement that the ILA and USMX has. So if you're wondering about the ILA, this is their website, a great site to kind of find out more about them, the history of the ILA, what's going on with them, where they cover. The ILA specifically represents up to 85,000 longshoremen on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, Great Lakes, major U.S. rivers, Puerto Rico, Eastern Canada, and the Bahamas. This is a note out from the ILA regarding that automation dispute. This came out on June 10th. Deals specifically with it. According to the spokesman from the ILA, quote, "Here we go again. This is another example of USMX members unilaterally circumventing our coastwise master contract. This is a clear violation of our agreement, and we will not tolerate it any longer." It goes on to say, this is from their international president, Harold J. Daggett, "There is no point in trying to negotiate a new agreement with USMX when one of its major companies continues to violate our current agreement with the sole aim of eliminating ILA jobs through automation." This is the statement from the US Maritime Alliance. What they basically said was USMA and the ILA met for local contract negotiations over the last 2 weeks. As is typical in our discussions, some issues will require further conversations between the local parties. USMX looks forward to re-engaging with the ILA's bargaining committee to jointly move local and master contract negotiations forward. So USMA represents ocean carriers, terminals up and down the Gulf and East Coast. Now, not every port on the Gulf and East Coast are represented by USMA or have ILA contracts in them is a bit different than what we saw on the West Coast. On the West Coast, PMA was in every port on the West Coast. That's not quite the same situation here with PMA and ILWU on the West Coast versus ILA and USMA on the East Coast. But here you can see their corporate offices, Dave Adams, who's chairman and CEO. But more importantly, I wanted to show you the directors and who they represent. So you have directors from Evergreen Shipping, that is based in Taiwan, the Ocean Network Express, that is Japan, Hapag Lloyd, that is Germany, Maersk is Danish, and then you have local Jacksonville Maritime Association, Charleston Stevedoring, CMA CGM, that is France, the Shipping Association of New York, New Jersey, Costco Shipping, that is mainland China, Mediterranean Shipping Company, that's based out of Switzerland, Ports America, which sounds very American, but it's actually Canadian, and then Gateway Terminals and the Boston Shipping Association. This statement came out from the ILA on June 10th, talking a little bit more about that issue, specifically some comments here regarding the profits of the ocean carriers. And this is a big issue that the union is discussing. The profitability of the ocean carriers has been immense over the past few years. And specifically, they target a few of the ocean carriers, for example, AP Moller, who for the 12-month period ending on September 30th, 2022, was made a profit of more than $32 billion, more than a 50% increase from the previous year. APM Terminals revenues grew by 9% to $4.4 billion. Goes on here, talks about Mediterranean Shipping Company and their profitability, the TIL Terminal Investment Limited, and even talks about Costco. It goes down here from a comment from the president of the ILA, Daggett. We are not going to entertain any sob stories from employers during negotiations about a sluggish economy. And this has been a kind of standard comment we've seen from the unions. If you look at the profitability of the ocean carriers, 2022, 2023 were large years for them. However, at the end of 2023, going into 2024, we saw a remarkable decrease. Now, it's back up again, thanks to the Houthi. What the union is talking about is they want a share of that profits for their labor. At the same time, there's this issue about automation. So if you talk about automation in ports, and more importantly, port performance, then one of the guides that most people tend to look at is this. This is put out by the World Bank Group. This is their Container Port Performance Index, the CPPI. They've been putting it out for a few years now, and they really measure port performances across the board in how effective ports are. Now, I want to break this down a little bit because when you look at the numbers, the U.S. does not look good in this report. So the PPI rests on total container ship in port time in a series of measurements. And we're going to look at those measurements because lots of times these measurements are beyond the control of certain agencies. So if you look at the global ranking of ports here, the number one port, Yangshan, is in China. Second port, Salalah, is in Oman, and then you have Cartagena in Colombia, Tangiers in Mediterranean, and it goes on. You don't see a U.S. port enter this list until you get down to number 55, which is the Port of Philadelphia, which is a very small container terminal. And more interesting is when you look at where U.S. ports wind up on this list, they tend to wind up towards the bottom. Long Beach at 373, Los Angeles at 375, Port Elizabeth at 391, Savannah at 395, Oakland at 397, Tacoma at 401. So the question does emerge is, okay, are U.S. ports inherently worse than every port around the world? Because that's what you're going to hear, is that the inefficiencies of the port is what's pushing the automation of the ports, how we need to kind of update our ports, because there is a long lead time in American ports. And the question is, why does that happen? Which means we got to break down what happens when a container ship comes into a port. This chart shows you the anatomy of a port call, and they break it down into 6 stages. The first is your arrival at the port limits. Second is you have steamed in and you've got all lines fastened. Number 3, you're able to execute the first lift. You've cleared all your clearance issues. You've got the containers begun to unlash. You're ready to start moving cargo. Number 4 is the last lift out. You're also securing cargo that's going back. Number 5, you've thrown off your lines. And number 6, you've steamed out. And in all those parts, there are elements where you can save time. And some of these take up more time than others. This chart really breaks it down by size of ships when the cargo operation is taking place versus arrival time and berth time. And you'll see smaller ships tend to take more time in their arrival time. Larger ships tend to be quicker on berth, less idle time, and they spend more of their time moving cargo. But of that, if you look at the overall, less than 60% of the time is really spent on a container ship in cargo operations. The remaining 40% is broken up. About 30% is involved in the arrival and getting in on time. And then the remaining time is really berth idle time when nothing is being done on the ship. And this is a worldwide number. If you look at the type of ships and the size of ships, 47% of the world ships are between 1,500 and 5,000 TEU. 15% take you up to 8,500 TEU. TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit, the measurement we use for box ships. 16% are up to 13,500, and then 9% are over 13,500, with 13% below 1,500. This chart is probably one of the most interesting they had, where they talk about the average arrival time development per region and ship size. And for this one, NAM is North America. And if you look at North America, it is the one that has the biggest problem. It is where average arrival time is up 19.1 hours overall. So the arrival time, the time it takes to get that ship from arriving to on berth, is 19.1 hours. And also look at the time frame this is taking place, 2022 to 2023. We were having still issues of the global supply chain crisis at that time. And so this is one of the factors that is driving down performance measures in U.S. ports, because U.S. ports were so congested, and that had to do not so much with port operations, but with the ability to get cargo out of the port into warehouses, into the inland distribution system. Now, this still means we have to have efficient ports, but American ports were notorious for piling containers up with them and not moving them very efficiently, to the point that they got so clogged it was very hard to move containers through the system. This one talks about the average arrival time performance per ship size range per region. And again, when you look at this, this looks a little bit better when you compare it. So if you look at NAM, North America, you see it's 11.7 hours. You compare it, for example, to Southeast Asia, SEA, it's 6.6 hours, or Northeastern Asia, China, 6.2 hours. If you look at Northeastern Europe, 8.6 hours. So the average is 9.1, with the U.S., North America being at 11.7. If you look at container moves performed per gross crane hour against various ship sizes, in other words, how many containers can an average crane move, you'll see that the sweet spot here is about 8,500 to 13,500 TEU ship. You can move about 24.8 containers an hour, and with the average being about 23.6 containers an hour. And if you look at the CPPI for North America, there are those U.S. and Canadian and Mexican ports there. You'll see Philadelphia with the best ranking at number 50. In the top 100 there is Charleston, Port Everglades, Wilmington, North Carolina, Boston, Miami, Jacksonville, Halifax, New York, New Jersey. Most of those ports, I would tell you, are on the fairly small side of container ports. New York, New Jersey is the exception there. It is a large major port. Also throw in Miami and Charleston, but the rest are fairly on the small side. If you look at the bottom end there, you can see some of the biggest ports: Houston at 327, Long Beach at 376, LA at 378, and Savannah at 398. And again, I think one of the factors that are at play here has to be the ability to get those containers from the ship ashore. So I think we got to be very careful. I know what the knee-jerk reaction here is based on what I saw when we were talking about the ILWU and the PMA. Groups want to blame unions. Well, unions are the problem, therefore it's the unions. Others want to blame the operating companies and the ports and the terminals. And I understand that, and I try to be agnostic here. I really don't like to choose sides and make sides. I'm trying to inform you of a very important issue, because I do think this issue, if it doesn't get resolved, will have a major impact on the political election cycle if all of a sudden on September 30th, these unions decide to stop moving cargo on the Gulf and East Coast. That is going to cause disruptions on a global scale, not just in the United States, but around the world. So a negotiation has to be done. Right now, the union, the ILA, is upset because some of the operators have shifted over to this AutoGate system, which is an efficient system. One of the things you're trying to improve is be able to move the containers in and out of the port more efficiently. One of the big problems we have, the reason you see those long wait times and that poor ranking of U.S. ports, is because they're not moving containers in and out of the terminals fast enough. We're moving containers. If you look at the measurement of containers on and off ships, that's not the problem. It doesn't matter if you're an automated crane or a human crane. That's not the issue. The problem is once that crane gets off the ship into the terminal and getting it out of the terminal, that's the key. If you look at retailers, retailers will tell you their objective is to get products, in the back door and out the front door as fast as they can. If they stay in the showroom and on the floor of the store, they're not making money. That's kind of what you want for your ports. How do you maximize that while at the same time not jeopardizing the labor base that you have built over the years? And understand, maritime unions in shipping go back a long way. And there's a really good reason why there's unions in shipping. If you look at the history of how mariners and dock workers were treated, again, you get the quick reaction, and go watch All Quiet on the Waterfront or read the book. But if you want to read a history, there's a lot of great histories about this. The maritime strike on the West Coast in 1934, the plight of mariners on ships. It was a really grueling issue. We have got to make ports more efficient. There needs to be a conversation about this. And one of the things that I think we miss in this country is that ports are operated on a local municipal level. It's by cities, by counties, by states. There's not a lot of federal overreach. There's no US Maritime Port Authority out there. There isn't. The Maritime Administration should have some overview of this to be able to discuss and be kind of that good, neutral party there, representing the interest of all the would-be consumers out there who don't have an interest in the port, in the terminal, in working there. They just want to get their goods in. And unfortunately, what tends to happen here, and what happened last time, is the situation was blowing up, and all of a sudden it took the Department of Labor and Commerce to come in to try to diffuse the situation. We don't want that to happen this time. The union, the ILA, and the USMA have to start talking. They have to be negotiating. You don't want this going up into the midst of an election cycle between two very young, strapping young men. I'm going to keep saying that because I have to make myself feel better about this upcoming election. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you learned a little bit about what's going on with the unions. We're going to follow this story because this is a developing story. Obviously, the discussion is broken down. We will be following it to see where it goes. Again, I am talking on the benefit of all of those who consume and use shipping for their daily lives. I am not picking a fight. I am not with the ILA. I am not with the USMA. I'm talking to you from as much I can an impartial way. Do I have compassion and feelings in this? Sure, but that's not what I'm doing here. Again, my goal is as a college professor and the host of this channel is to educate and not indoctrinate. That's not what I try to do. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next episode, or until the unions and the shore establishment go to each other's throat one more time, which will probably be sooner rather than later, this is Sal signing off.